in this video I would like to have an honest conversation, an honest talk about the question of IQ, the quantification of intelligence. And this video will be structured in 4 parts. In the first part, I will talk about Hegel's logic, the logic of the concept. In the second part, I will talk about my personal experience with an IQ test. You can skip this part. In the third part, I will talk about what I broadly know about IQ. And in the fourth part, I will talk about the various kinds of intelligence and the advantages and the problems of having a high IQ. So this is the structure of the video. I will put the structure with the chronological links down below if you want to directly reach the part which might interest you the most. So I begin. Hegel's logic, the logic of the concept, explains that the concept is that which is universal, but it includes within itself the particular and the singular. And to illustrate the difference in logic between universal, particular, and singular, I will use the very classical example of classical logic. Socrates, all men are mortals. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's the classical syllogism. And the universal in this reasoning, a syllogism is a reasoning, an act of reason. Mortal is the universal, man is the particular, and Socrates is the singular. And we could use different particulars, for instance, apes, lions, dogs. These are particular types of living organisms, of mammals, living things. And apes, lions, and dogs, they share in common the fact that they are mammals, that they are living organisms, but also that they are mortals, because all living organisms are mortal. And we could replace the singular, Socrates, by any other singular, and I could name Greek characters, Callicles, Pericles, Leonidas. These are singular men, singular Greek men of the classical period, era. So yeah, this is the illustration. And Hegel says that we can think through what he calls der Verstand, which is the understanding in English, the categorical mind. We can think that the universal, the particular, and the singular are separated. But Hegel says that the true mode of thinking consists in uniting these 3 modes of the concept, which means that the concept for Hegel, which is the universal, which is God, if you will, universal being. For Hegel, this is God. The concept particularizes itself. The concept sets limits, determinations within itself. So he limits itself. He makes itself finite. And not only does he particularizes itself, but he singularizes itself. And in the Christian religion, this is the idea that God makes himself man through Jesus. Jesus, for the Christians, is God made human. And for Hegel, the interpretation is that the universal made himself singular through an act of self-determination. The idea of determination, a determination is a limit. I don't know how it is in English, but the idea of termin, the Latin root termin, in French it means the end, the finite, the closing. So to determine it and a determination is a finite structuring of an object. To determine what an object is to determine what it is not, to grasp the limits of an object. So to be determined, one could think of being determined as being enslaved, so to speak, or lacking freedom. If you are determined to act the way you do by an external agent, it means that the external determinations are not your own, so that you are not free, so to speak. To illustrate with an example, when people are drunk, they have drunk too much alcohol and they commit either a crime or a car accident, they hit someone on the road, or they say stupid things because they are drunk. From a judicial standpoint, they will be less punished if they were in a state of being drunk than if they had a clear mind, because it is understood broadly, not everywhere, but broadly, that when you are drunk, you are determined by alcohol, which means chemical reactions within your brain, to act in a certain way, and you are not completely free. You were free to drink or not to drink alcohol, but once you're drunk, you lose yourself in a way. So that's complicated. And the idea that the young people who are less, depending on the countries, but in some countries, the idea that when you are under the age of 16, if you commit a crime, you are less guilty than if you are 16 or 18 or an adult, because it is widely believed that when the younger you are, the less capable of determining yourself you are. And the reason why women were prevented from voting in the 19th century and the earlier parts of the 20th century is that it was believed that women were less free than men, so that they would be more easily influenced by the priests or by the media or by whatever, that they had less capability of freedom, of self-determination than men had, and that's why women were prevented from voting. And freedom or liberty, I don't know, honestly, I don't know what's the difference between freedom and liberty in the English world and English words, because we have only one word in my language to express both ideas. But the idea of freedom or liberty, as we unconsciously conceive the idea, is that the idea of self-determination, to be able to set your own determination within reality by acting, by producing an action. And you are free to the extent that you act and that you are not acted by an external agent. So freedom or liberty is not the absence of determination. That would be the void. There's no determination. In pure being or in pure nothing, there is no determination. So freedom, as it is unconsciously thought about, is not the absence of determination, it is self-determination. Namely that you act, you exteriorize yourself, and you produce your own determinations, your own limitations. So to be free and to act freely is to self-determine, to self-limit oneself. And there is in philosophy the idea that if you are confronted by a cake, a sweet cake, and if you love eating cakes, what is freedom? Are you free to eat the cake? Is it an expression of your freedom to eat the cake? Or, that's the broad idea that if you love eating cakes, you want to be free to eat as much cakes as you like. But then there's a problem. If you eat too much cakes, you become fat, and then you cannot move yourself, and you become dependent on sweetness, and you become decadent. So a higher perspective on freedom from a philosophical standpoint is that to be free means to love cakes, to see a cake, to want to eat the cake, but to find the inner will to renounce your will to eat the cake. And that is to be free in the highest speculative philosophical understanding of the word. So to be free means to renounce what you love. So that's complicated. Yeah. So Now, I've been speaking for 10 minutes, maybe that's too long. I will illustrate the conceptual distinction in Hegel's philosophy between the singular, the particular, and the universal. The individual that you see, this face, this character, this person, I am singular in the sense that I am just me. My name is Lucas, and I am just me. I have my own psychology, my own history, my own wicked tendencies, my own flaws, my own evil, my own wickedness, my own self. This is just me. And this me is of no interest, or should be of no interest to anyone but to me as an empirical singular self. So, yeah. And my evil consists in the fact that I love only me, this singular individual that you see. And when I love only myself, I am evil. There's also this idea that even in evil, you find love in a way. So that's kind of weird, but yeah. Then, and also I would like to add that as a singular self, this singular individual that you see, I love, for instance, I love drinking beers. And I have been drinking a beer, a Greenbergen beer, whose motto is Ardet Nec Consumitur. I will put that in the title of the video. And it says that it is blonde, and I love blonde beers, and a part of me loves blonde women, my German part, I guess. And it says that it is round and balanced. This beer is blonde, it is round, and it is balanced. So it may be the perfect beer. I don't know. Sometimes my jokes are too funny that I can't help laughing about them. Okay, more seriously. Then I am a particular individual. You can partly see my particularities, but not completely. I guess that whoever you are, you can partly see that I am European, I am broadly white, I have a white skin, and I have broadly European features. I guess that people who look at me without knowing who I am, they would say, well, he's a European. Some have said that I look Italian, that I have a rather dark skin for a white person, but overall, I guess that I'm white. You can also broadly guess by looking at me that I'm in my late 20s. I may look older than I am, but if you had to guess my age, you would say I'm between 28 and 35, broadly. So my real age is 29, so yeah. And you can also probably guess that I am a male. Maybe I'm a female, but the beard would make it suspiciously. If I were a female, that would be a great deception. But yeah. So I have particularities in the sense that I am European, I am in my late 20s, and I am a male. And therefore, the realm of particularity in Hegel's logic is the realm of opposition, in the sense that I am particularly what I am, and I am opposed to what I am not in the realm of particularities, in the sense that my particular self is more closely related to Europeans than to non-Europeans. I am more closely related to the people in their late 20s than in the people, I guess, the people between 25 and 35, than the people who are much younger or much older than I am. And I am more closely related to males than to females, but at the same time, these particular determinations enable me to confront the opposite, and by understanding myself from my particular determinations, I can also understand the other particulars. So by being a European, I can understand non-Europeans, Asians, Africans, etc., etc. And by understanding that I am determined by my generation, the spirit of my time, I can understand that those who lived before me are determined by another zeitgeist, as Hegel says. And by understanding myself as a male, I can understand the female, how we differ from one another. So there's this idea that identity and difference are identical because one cannot be thought of without the other. That's Hegel's logic. And then I have a universal aspect that you can't see. You can only grasp the universal in me by listening to my words, by focusing on my speech, by trying to extract the logical meaning and the logical truth of my words. And truth is the same for all. Every thinking consciousness knows the truth to be true independently of its particularities and its singularities. And I don't know if there are extraterrestrial beings. I don't think there are, but even if there were extraterrestrial beings in the universe, if I say 2 plus 2 equals 4, whatever galaxy they live in, this truth will be the same for them and for me and for every thinking consciousness. So, yeah. And what is envisioned as being alchemy in the esoteric tradition is the idea to turn lead, which is a base metal, into gold, which is the most noble of all metals. And Hegel's philosophy is the logical process of transforming lead into gold, which in logical concept, in logical terminology, means to transform the singular into the universal. This is an alchemical process. But in order to reach the universal, to reach gold, you have to begin with lead, with the singular. So I am starting to understand that my purpose in life is to try to extract the universal truth, which is present, although tainted and mixed and tainted in my singular experience of the world. So what I must do, I guess, is to try to transform my personal, singular, empirical experience of the world into a universal viewpoint. And this is a very difficult process, but I try, to the best of my limited capabilities, of producing a speech which is universal, which can be valid and true for every thinking consciousness, beyond the singularities and the particularities. And this is an alchemical process. And I will put a link to... first I will give an anecdote. When there is one piece of food for 2 human beings, these two human beings share a particularity or a universality in the sense that they are living organisms and that they need food to maintain their biological existence, and they need energy in the form of food to maintain themselves. So both individuals are identical in the sense that they need food to maintain and sustain themselves. But they are opposed in the sense that the one singularity is opposed to the other, in the sense that the singular wants the food for himself, and the singular is that which negates the other singular. So they are identical, but at the same time they are opposed. So what do? Is it a fight to the death to see who gets to eat the food? Or do we manage to transcend ourselves and to share the limited amount of food? That's very difficult. And in education, we teach children to learn to share, which is the most difficult thing to do. Because you have to renounce a part of yourself. You have to renounce your selfish self in order to share what would benefit you and to share it with the other so that he might enjoy the benefits. So you have to renounce yourself to gain a higher version in yourself in finding satisfaction in the satisfaction of the other. And there's a scene in the cartoon Pokemon between Meowth and Pikachu, which is a very profound scene. It's Hegel's Philosophy for Kids, and I will put the link, and it's very profound. And cultural Hegelianism consists in saying that modern pop culture is full of profoundly speculative ideas. So, we're 20 minutes in, and I am just starting the second part. I will talk about, this is the singular part. You can skip directly to the third part if you're not interested. But a few months ago, I made an IQ test because I wanted to know if I was intelligent or not. And I believed that my IQ would be 105. I am a Frenchman empirically, and in France the average IQ is broadly 98. It's slightly below the Anglo-Saxon mean, and maybe it has declined over the past couple of decades, but anyway. But the French are European people, I mean the white French, and the average European standard is oscillating between 96 and 102 broadly. So to simplify, a white European has an average IQ of 100. It's simplification, it's not really true, but I simplify. So I thought that I would have an IQ of 105. I secretly hoped that it would be 110, because I knew that when I was young I had good school grades, and that there is a correlation between your scholar or educational achievements and your intelligence. And I discovered that my IQ was 131, which sets me in the 98th percentile of the French population of my age. So from a quantitative standpoint, I am more intelligent than 98% of adult Frenchmen. I did not expect that I would be that intelligent. So I should have been happy and satisfied. And I will give an anecdote. The IQ test lasted for about, I think, 130 hours. I made tests, I had to answer questions, both verbally and in the written word. And it was very intense. And I remember that after the test had been completed, I had not the results because it took a few weeks to get the results, but I had just made a test, and I felt ecstatic because I had spent so much cognitive energy. It was so demanding, it was so exhausting that I felt joy, and I was in a state of ecstasy almost. It was almost after sexual act. I felt vigorous and alive, and I was exhausted, but I enjoyed being exhausted. I felt alive and ecstatic, and I loved having spent my intellectual power and having been tested and confronted by an intellectual challenge. So I enjoyed the state of emotion and mind that it gave me. And when I got the results, I should have been very happy, because quantitatively I am much more intelligent than a lot of people in my country and in my age and overall in the whole world, because there are not many people who have an IQ of above 130, although there's a margin for error. But overall, I know myself now that I am more intelligent than most people. But I felt disappointed because if you have an IQ of 131, you have not an IQ of 150 or 160 or 170 or beyond. So I did not hope that I would have such a high IQ, but now that I knew, I was kind of disappointed, because I said to myself, I will never be Newton, I will never be Aristotle, I will never be Hegel, I will never be Francis Galton, who apparently had a very high IQ. So I will never be able to understand the books written by men whose IQ is 10, 20, 30, 40 points above mine. I cannot understand a book about theoretical physics. It's too complicated for me. And also, my quantitative measure of purely hypothetical deductive logic was just 105, which means the 63rd percentile, namely my ability in pure logic is higher than 63% of the French population of my age, but it's not that great. And on the other hand, I have a very high verbal IQ and a very high what they call working memory. So my verbal IQ is 137. It's the 99th percentile. So I am verbally very gifted, more than most people. And I know this now and kind of find satisfaction in it, but I kind of felt disappointed for being so weak in logic. So what should have given me satisfaction produced disappointment. And also it gave me confidence because I didn't thought that I was that intelligent, so it gave me confidence in my ability to read books and to succeed in intellectual endeavors and to share knowledge. So yeah. I will stop there for the second part. Now the third part. What do I know about IQ? I published a couple of days ago a list of all the books which are in my library. I have not read all of them. I do not know them by heart. So if you are interested in knowing where do I get my knowledge from, you can just watch this text of all the list of all my books. The video is titled "My Naked Soul," etc., etc. You can read the titles of all the books, which are all of them are in English, who deal with the question of IQ. Most of them are from Richard Lynn, the psychologist. There's also Charles Murray in the Bell Curve. There's Rinderman. There's Helmut Nyborg. There's what's his name? Rinderman, I quoted him. There's Arthur Jensen. So yeah, this is what I know. So what do I know from my readings about IQ? IQ is a continuum, and in Hegel's logic, continuity and discretion are two modes of the same quantitative determination. So the IQ continuum in the world among all the various populations of mankind is continuous, but at the same time it is discrete. So you can say that it is infinite, but at the same time it is finite. You can set determinations and limits. And broadly there are, I would say, 5 groups. I simplify. There are the Ashkenazi Jews, who are the most intelligent ethnic group on average, with an IQ of apparently 115. So the Ashkenazi Jews are really, really smart, above the average. Then there are the Northeast Asians, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, with an IQ of 105 on average. So they are the second most intelligent group on the planet. Then there are whites, whose IQ oscillates and varies between 103, 102 for the most intelligent in Northern Europe, and in Eastern Europe it's 96. So to simplify, the average white mean is 100. And whites who have, on average, a lower IQ than that, I'm not talking about individual whites, but groups of whites, they are partly mixed raced, for instance, in South America, and so on and so forth. Then there are groups of peoples whose IQ is between 90 or 95, but more 90 and 80, broadly. I simplify. If you want the details, you can read the books that I have listed in my library. These are the Northern Africans, the Hispanics, the Southeast Asians, the Indians of India, the Native Americans of North and South America, and the Arabs. Yeah. And then you have a group of population who has a lower IQ on average. These are the blacks of Africa. The Afro-Americans have an average IQ of 85, which is relatively high for blacks because they have partly white genes and they have good environmental conditions in America. So the blacks of Africa apparently have a very low IQ, around 70, maybe more, but yeah. The Australian Aborigines and some non-Negroid black populations of the southern parts of Africa, they are natives of Africa, they are black, but they do not belong to the racial anthropologic group of which is called the Negroids. So yeah. And one cannot understand world economics, which is tied to world sociology and world politics, without understanding that human groups are different on average in intellectual quantitative determinations. Economics, politics, sociology on a world scale is simply unintelligible without the determination of IQ. One cannot understand anything about the present world and about the past, about the history of mankind, without taking into account the question of IQ. Then there is the question of geniuses. Whites, for a reason which is yet unknown, have on average a higher proportion of geniuses, namely very intelligent, very gifted, creative individuals. Most of them are males, and it is believed by modern scientists that the bell curve, which is the bell-shaped curve of IQ distribution, for whites it is more extended on both sides. So there are more whites who are really, really smart and really, really dumb than Jews and Northeast Asians. And this is what might explain the reason why on the history of human accomplishments and human achievements, there are more whites than Asians who have produced great science, great literature, great mathematics, great philosophy, great creative artistic endeavors than Northeast Asians, although on average Northeast Asians are more intelligent. So this question is still a mystery. Yeah. Then, I know that IQ, as a quantitative determination of intelligence, is a mixture of genes and environment. So, by the time you get a fixed and set determination for IQ, which is quantitative intelligence, which apparently appears in the teenage years, and the IQ that you get in your teenage years will not change considerably along your life, except when you are very old, but it will remain relatively stable. And by the time that your IQ becomes stable, so to speak, you haven't had the opportunity to influence your quantitative intelligence. You inherit your intelligence from either your genes, for which you are not responsible of, or your environment, namely your family, the school, and the society in which you live, your education in the broad sense. So whatever aspect you look at, by the time you can measure your IQ and say this will be the IQ for most of the rest of your life, you have not chosen your own IQ. It was the result of the determinations of the environment and the genes for which you were not responsible. And knowing that IQ plays such an important role in modern democratic societies, in the socio-economic mobility and the socio-economic status that you get, it creates some problems, because it means that those who are poor because they have a low IQ, they are not responsible for their IQ, therefore they are not responsible for their poverty if it is shown that IQ and poverty are correlated. And the same goes for the rich. If you are rich because you have an IQ of 135, do you deserve to be rich on your own merit because you worked hard, or did you just were lucky in the lottery of IQ distribution? That's a question. So then I will talk about the knowledge of IQ, the question of IQ. To know that human beings are separated in their particularities, the various ethnic groups, and in their singularities, the various distribution of the bell curve within each particular groups, creates ambiguities. And I will tell an anecdote. When I discovered, it was in November 2017, by watching Stephen Molyneux. He had a video on the relationship between IQ and crime and employment and welfare dependency and social status about the various ethnicities in America. When I discovered the relationship, I was struck. I was amazed. It was a shock. But I did not feel hatred against blacks or Hispanics, because on average they have a lower IQ, and that on average this lower IQ causes them to on average have more criminal behaviors and to be more dependent on the welfare state and to be poorer on average. On the other hand, I was kind of in a state of being I understood them. I was not angry. I was in a state of understanding. It was kind of liberating in a way. And I remember on one of Stephen Molyneux's video talking about IQ, there was a black internet user making fun of a white audience because he said, I knew he was black because he said that he was black. He said that it's kind of funny to watch these low IQ whites, the whites who are in the lower end of the IQ distribution, be interested in questions of IQ, knowing that there are many blacks who are more intelligent than many whites. This is mathematical necessity. So it was kind of an irony, because there are many whites who want and get interested in the question of IQ by hoping that because they are white, they can participate in the sharing of the bell curve of intelligence. But the bell curve precisely is a bell curve. So half white people have an IQ below 100. So half of the white population is below average. That's a tautology, because the average is precisely the middle. So half the whites are below average in intelligence. And they wished that they all had a higher intelligence, but it is mathematically impossible. So, yeah. Then I will talk about the ambiguities in terms of morality about the knowledge of IQ. To know about IQ can lead to the will to improve all human groups by implementing eugenic measures or political measures which favor the quantitative increase of IQ by increasing and bettering the environment, the educational system, the food, and so on and so forth to make the population more intelligent. Or it can be used to make the population more stupid. Once you know the scientific determinations of IQ, you can manipulate the population to turn them into idiots and imbeciles. That's a possibility. And also, so there's the good and the bad in the idea of increasing or lowering the IQ. And then there is the bad in the realm of the particular, which is the idea that you can use this scientific knowledge to increase the intelligence of your own particular groups, which is good for your own group, but bad for others because it's selfish from the particular standpoint. And the illustration is whites who want to use the knowledge of IQ and racial science and intelligence science to increase the intelligence of whites at the expense of non-whites. So we have this ambiguity again in the moral and epistemological sphere. So there is a polarity around the question of science between the question of ignorance, you should not know about the question of IQ, the will to power to use the knowledge about IQ either to increase or to downgrade or to decrease the intelligence of the population. So you can use knowledge either for good or for bad. Or the middle, which is impartial knowledge, which is to know about the determinations of intelligence and to remain in the middle without judging, just to know and to help for the better with no anger and no will to power, just to understand and to find peace in understanding. Yeah. The fourth part, I will talk about the various kinds of intelligence. I know that there have been many books written about precisely the various kinds of intelligence, and when we use the word kind, it's a vocabulary to express the logical determination of particularity. So there is intelligence, which is the universal, and then there is emotional intelligence, mathematical intelligence, musical intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, which are particular determinations of the universality, which is intelligence. And I know that, for instance, there are many football players or dancers or musicians who have not a very high IQ in terms of abstract intelligence, the kind of intelligence which is measured by IQ tests, but who have a very high intelligence in what is called musical or kinesthetic intelligence. There are many football players who are dumb from an abstract quantitative intelligence point of view. They are considered dumb by the population who loves to make fun of them because they are millionaires and they are rich and they are privileged, and the working class kind of resent them for their success, so they find peace and appeasement in mocking the football players or the basketball players for being dumb. That's kind of a psychological characteristic of mankind, I guess. Yeah. And truth be told, the people with a very high IQ have a higher capacity and ability for enjoying more complex ideas. For instance, to appreciate art. In order to appreciate great art, one needs a high IQ, because the complexity to appreciate great poetry, great architecture and sculpture and painting, and even great music, it requires a very high IQ. But at the same time, the higher the IQ, the higher the suffering, because people who are very intelligent tend to see the world in such a complex, conflicting, contradictory way. I'm not saying that if you are low in intelligence from a quantitative standpoint, you do not suffer. You can suffer a great deal, but you do not put so much complexity in your suffering. And people who have a low average intelligence, it is believed by some that they are happier, because they do not ask themselves too much questions. They do not reflect too much upon the meaning of life. They are just here. They suffer when they do. They are happy when they do, but they are kind of have a joyful indifference to the fact of existence. So there's this prejudice among intelligent, mostly white people, who believe that if we were more dumb, we would be more happy, and that intelligence brings suffering. And another ambiguity of high intelligence is that if you are stupid, which is a quantitative determination of intelligence, you can perpetrate low amount of evil. If you have low intelligence, you can only be evil in a limited sense. But the more intelligent you are, the more capability you have for doing evil. Because to be really evil requires to be really intelligent, and that's why we talk about an evil genius, or a genius of crime, or a mastermind of evil. And evil can be used for good or for bad, and that's another reason why people say that if you were dumb, you would not be capable of perpetrating great evils, because you can take a knife and stab a man, you can kill or bleed one man to death. But if you are dumb, that's the more you can do. Or you can take a gun and shoot people, but you will shoot a relative few amount of people. But if you are really intelligent, you can use your intelligence to create a lot of evil. And for instance, the leading members of the Nazi regime in Germany, they were forced to take IQ tests, and it was shown that they were very intelligent on average. That the Göring, Goebbels, I don't know if he was tested, Himmler, Eichmann, Hitler, they were not all tested, but the Nazi leaders who took IQ tests, it was shown that they were much more intelligent than the average German population. And it was because they were so intelligent that they could implement such wicked plans in a way. So yeah. And also I will conclude by saying that I know from broad knowledge and reading that among whites and Jews, who are on average more intelligent than most other populations, I don't know what is the case for Northeast Asians, but I know that it is the case for Jews and for whites, and especially for Jews, that they suffer proportionately from a higher proportion of psychiatric and psychological diseases. There are many very intelligent Jews who suffer from clinical psychological problems. Depression, anxiety, hysteria, paranoia, schizophrenia, suicidal tendencies, depression. So being intelligent can be kind of a burden. And that's what I wanted to say. So I will stop there for now. I tried to share the idea that I could. And like I said, I published my library, and if you are interested, you can find the books, you can buy the books, read the books, you can find knowledge on the internet about IQ, intelligence, the relationship between the various socio-economic determinations, the relationship between intelligence and insanity and suffering and so on and so forth. So I try to share my knowledge, and yeah.